The honourable member from Markham Unionville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May marks Asian Heritage Month, a time to celebrate the contributions of Asian Canadians to our great nation. This year's theme, Preserving the Past, Embracing the Future, Amplifying Asian Canadians' Legacy, highlights the resilience of Asian Canadians over adversity. Canadians of Asian heritage from over 40 countries enrich our society with diverse culture and traditions. These Canadians and their communities have been part of shaping Canada's heritage and identity for centuries. However, the rise in anti-Asian hate crime is alarming and unacceptable. We must unite, condemn racism, and strive for a safer, more inclusive society. Let's stand together, combat systemic racism, and honor the enduring legacy of Asian Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, when a child becomes sick, the whole family hurts. We know that when families stay together, sick children get stronger. This is where Ronald McDonald House Charities Canada comes in. RMHC operates an essential mission in Canada today as the only national organization enabling access to Canada's pediatric healthcare system. Today is a special day because it is McHappy Day, in which a portion of proceeds from every menu item purchased at McDonald's Canada will directly contribute to supporting RMHC. RMHC houses provide families with accommodation, meals, mental health and wellness programming, peer support, support for siblings, respite, laundry, school, and many other services to take care of the entire family while their child is being treated at a nearby hospital. I have seen the impact of these services where RMHC Southwestern Ontario's House at London Health Services Centre served over 280 communities and over 4,600 families in the past year and allowed families to focus on what matters most, their kids. So today on McHappy Day, support Canadians and support the Ronald McDonald House.
Yeah. The honourable member from Brampton South.
Speaker, this past weekend I had the pleasure to attending Embroidered's second annual Celebrate Gala and the Zonta Club of Brampton Caledon of 50th celebration. Embroidered, Agency of End Violence for the past 40 years, has been working hard to eradicate gender-based violence and provide essential support to survivors of violence. Similarly, for the past 50 years, Zonta Club of Brampton Caledon has been working hard in the Peel region on gender equality and expanding access to education for women and girls. Mr. Speaker, last week, I also met with Shalina Jashani and Sharon from the Safe Centre of Peel, a unique centre providing support services for Bramptonians to fight gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and support victims. Mr. Speaker, organizations like these are on the ground doing real work and champion equality and justice. When we empower women today and we create a just, equitable tomorrow and safe place for women, all women. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Nunahab Deputy, the honourable member South.
Mr. Speaker, today is McHappy Day, an annual celebration of giving to support Ronald McDonald House Charities. Across Canada, 16 Ronald McDonald houses and 18 Ronald McDonald family rooms give families a place to stay together while their child is being treated at a nearby hospital. I was honoured to announce $9.3 million for the expansion of the Ottawa House, only 167 steps from the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, through our government's Green and Inclusive Community Building program. This funding will more than double the size of the current Ottawa House and help with the future needs of families who have to travel from across Ontario and Nunavut to seek medical care for their children. So today, on McHappy Day, I'm proud to thank McDonald's Restaurants of Canada and Ronald McDonald House Charities for all that they do, Mr. Speaker, to support Canadian families when they absolutely need it the most. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the work of War Child Canada on its 25th anniversary. War Child is a globally recognized leader in creating and implementing comprehensive programs for children living with war and violence. It was founded by Dr. Samantha Nutt in 1999 to address what she saw as significant challenges in the way in which support was being provided to children in areas of conflict. War Child's model of humanitarian action is rooted in collaboration. It is locally driven and locally led. The work to foster the capacity of children, their families, and their communities to develop resilience, self-reliance, and self-determination in overcoming the impacts of violence and displacement. Today, War Child Canada is operational in Afghanistan, Uganda, South Sudan, Sudan, Yemen, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Nutt and the War Child Canada team on 25 years of service. Thank you.
The honourable member from Brandon Souris.
I rise to congratulate Manitoba's very own Jennifer Jones on her legendary curling career. Jennifer was born with a broom in one hand and a rock in the other. Time and time again, she showed us how to win. She saw angles and runbacks that no one else could see, and there was nothing more exciting than watching Jennifer make a miraculous shot to put a double or a triple on the board. A 6-time Scotties Tournament of Hearts champion and 2-time Women's World Curling champion, Jennifer made Canada proud every time she wore the maple leaf. Her undefeated run in the Sochi Olympics in 2014 to win the gold medal cemented her place as one of the greatest curlers of all time. Jennifer is a tremendous leader and a beacon of inspiration for an entire generation of young women to take up the sport of curling. I would like to wish Jennifer, Brett, Bella, and Skyla all the best for the years to come. Here's to Jennifer, who leaves the curling rink with a rock-solid legacy.
The honourable member from Oakville North, Burlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May 5th marked National Awareness Day for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, also known as Red Dress Day. Alarmingly, despite comprising only 4.3% of the population, Indigenous women are 4 times more likely than non-Indigenous women to be the victims of violence, making up 16% of all female homicide victims and 11% of missing women. Since last year, I've been working with my friend, the MP for Winnipeg Centre, to implement a red dress system to rapidly notify the public when an Indigenous woman, girl, or Two-Spirit person goes missing. I've been honored to take part in the consultations that have been Indigenous-led and informed. I'm also thrilled with the rapid action our government has taken on this, in particular the former and current Minister of Crown and Indigenous Relations, leading to the announcement last week in partnership with the province of Manitoba to implement a regional Red Dress Alert pilot program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Milton.
Mark DeMontis is one of Canada's leading accessibility strategists. As the Chief Accessibility Officer at the Substance Group, he helps organizations to harness the potential of the 8 million Canadians with disabilities. He has a unique perspective as someone who has experienced life both with and without sight, and has over 15 years' experience making brands and organizations more accessible for consumers and workers with disabilities. After losing his NHL dream unexpectedly at the age of 17 from sudden sight loss, Mark established Canadian Blind HoC, which offers programming and competitions for Canadians who are blind and partially sighted of all ages. He's also inline skated over 8,000 kilometers across Canada to raise money for the cause. I'm thrilled that Canadian Blind HoC was a recipient of our government's Community Sport for All initiative, supporting physical activity and recreation in the grassroots levels right across Canada. His story has been featured on Hockey Night in Canada, CTV's W5, and TSN's Breaking Down Barriers. He's a recipient of the Terry Fox Humanitarian Award, and this week he was named one of 3 finalists for the 2024 NHL Willie O'Ree Community Hero Award, and I couldn't agree more. He deserves it. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Simcoe Grey.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, 2 million Canadians per month now use the food bank. This includes seniors, veterans, and members of the Canadian Armed Forces. At the Angus Food Bank, I was told that without the support of local grocers, Justin and Stacey, that it would have to shut its doors. The CEO of Food Banks Canada says that food banks are becoming unsustainable. To make matters worse, a new report by Canada's food professor Sylvain Charlebois finds that almost 60% of Canadians now eat expired food. People are risking getting sick in order to save money on groceries. This NDP Liberal government may talk a big game about reducing poverty, but in their Canada, soldiers line up at food banks and families eat expired food in order to make ends meet. It's time to axe the tax and restored food affordability here in Canada.
That's right.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, once again, I'm going to praise the solidarity and love of the arts and culture of the people of Beauport-Limoilou. Tomorrow, these two themes will unite around Jean-François Girard, the man behind Limoilou en Vrac and organizer of Limoilou en Musique. When it comes to arts and culture, you can be sure that JF is behind the scenes. Tomorrow, the Shaved Head Challenge will be the opening event of Limoilou en Musique in solidarity with JF, who has been diagnosed with cancer. Together, we are with you, Jean-François. We all have someone in our lives who has faced or is facing cancer. Jean-François, Dad, my aunts Rosaline, Marie-Lourdes, and Nathalie, my uncles Francis and Ghislain, my friends Caroline, Luc, Kirsty, and Patricia, they make up my list. Think of yours. Like Beauport-Limoilou, support research and your local organizations. Jean-François, we are in solidarity with you in chorus and in music. We will win. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Imagine a country where young couples aged 24 and 26 are forced to leave their apartment and move back in with their parents in the hope of one day becoming homeowners. Imagine a country in which the housing crisis has become one of the main causes of stress among psychiatric patients. Imagine a country where a woman considers living in a minivan because she can't find an affordable place to stay. Imagine a country where tenants contact housing committees with very clear plans to commit suicide, because they're not only in a state of despair, but they also don't see a solution and want to end it all. This country is unfortunately Canada, as described in the newspapers day after 9 years of this Liberal Prime Minister. With $500 billion in inflationary spending, supported by the Bloc Québécois, this Prime Minister has created the worst inflation in 40 years, raising interest rates, making the dream of home ownership impossible, doubling the cost of housing and throwing thousands of people out on the street. Canada wasn't like this before this Prime Minister, who isn't worth the cost. And unfortunately, it won't be like this with the arrival of common sense in the next Conservative government.
The Honourable Member from Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
After 9 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the crime, chaos, drugs, or disorder. His disastrous decision to legalize hard drugs in public in British Columbia has failed miserably. Some would call his judgment nothing short of wacko. And let's be clear, it is wacko that parents have to search fields before their kids play sports. It is wacko to allow meth or crack to be smoked in a hospital as doctors and nurses try to do their job. And it is wacko that it took 2 weeks for this Prime Minister to reverse course. But the most wacko of all of this is the fact that the Prime Minister still won't rule out expanding this crazy experiment to Toronto and Montreal, where it would inflict the same chaos we've seen in BC. I'll just say this. There was a time when someone said there was a small fringe minority in Canada talking about their apparent radical and wacko views. Well, it turns out it's alive and well. It's today's Liberal Party and this Prime Minister.
The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, Sherbrooke writer Mélanie Noël won the Artist of the Year in Estrie Award by the Conseil des Arts et des Lettres du Québec at the Apéro Culture 2023. She received the Judith Jasmin Prize. Her 3 books are touching and delicate and come to life thanks to her writing. And her works are found in 3 albums. Writing for her is a way to carry others away with her stories and her charm. She is a mother and an adventurer, and she draws her inspiration from the small pleasures in life. Melanie will continue to influence and work with a number of individuals. Congratulations for the success that you have found with your writing. The Honourable Member for
Breast Day, a day to raise awareness, remember, and honor missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people. It's vital that we hold these people in our hearts and in our minds. But more than that, it's important that we as legislators work to implement the calls for justice from the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Le taux d'homicide.
The homicide rate for Indigenous women and girls remains 6 times higher than their non-Indigenous counterparts. A year ago, members of this House unanimously backed a motion declaring the deaths and disappearances of Indigenous women and girls a Canada-wide emergency.
The recent partnership between the federal government and Manitoba in implementing a Red Dress Alert pilot program to notify the public of missing Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people is an important step, but we must and have to do more to end gender-based violence against Indigenous women and girls and gender diverse individuals. No more stolen sisters, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, history buffs will remember that on the night of May 7th, 1944, at the height of the Second World War, the frigate HMCS Valleyfield was torpedoed by a German ship, taking the lives of 125 crew members. In a scenario worthy of a blockbuster, the Valleyfield carried a top-secret decoder that allowed the Allies to send each other secure strategic messages. All this history is uncovered, shared, and highlighted by an exceptional man from Salaberry-sur-Roi, Lieutenant Pierre Lefebvre. His passion for naval history led him to erect a monument to the HMCS Valleyfield in 2000, bringing together survivors of the attack for the event. He also founded the Valleyfield Sea Cadet Corps 329. On the eve of his retirement from the armed forces after 46 years of service, I would like to acknowledge Mr. Lefebvre's work and thank him for his involvement in our community. Thank you, Pierre.
The Honourable Member from Lethbridge.
This Liberal government isn't worth the cost, and neither is the CBC. Under the leadership of the CEO, Catherine Tate, viewership is down, trust is down, and revenue is down. But despite this abysmal performance, the Liberal government has awarded Ms. Tate by extending her contract and granting another $60,000 bonus. That's more than most Canadians make in an entire year.
Yeah.
Another $15 million was handed over to the executives as more bonus money. And after this, the CEO had the nerve to come to committee and claim that the CBC is chronically underfunded, and then announced that she would be cutting 800 jobs. Then, just weeks ago, the Prime Minister announced that he would be giving $140 million more to this same failed institution, which means now the CEO can continue to give herself and the top executives big fat bonuses.
Right.
And this greed and incompetence is exactly what is dragging this organization down. Common sense Conservatives are calling on the Liberal government to instruct the CBC to stop awarding themselves big fat bonuses.
The Honourable Member from Vancouver, Granville.
Mr. Speaker, May 3rd commemorated World Press Freedom Day, a day when we celebrate journalists for the work that they do, the risks they take to keep us informed. They pay a high price, Mr. Speaker, from attacks by authoritarian regimes to criminal enterprises. Journalists risk life and limb pursuing truth. This year, the price was high. The deadliest year on record, 115 journalists dead in conflict zones, the word press emblazoned on their flak jackets, sharing stories that we need to hear. Hundreds more languishing in jail. While the Leader of the Opposition and others, as we've just heard, boast about putting for sale signs on the CBC, many around the world are putting up gravestones instead. It's a short trip from rhetorical attacks to the press to actual violence. As journalists perish in jails and newsrooms dim their lights, truth and fiction become harder and harder to distinguish. I am proud to be part of a government that stands with journalists, champions facts over misinformation, and reinforces the democratic values which we hold dear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions, questions orales.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Conservatives have a common sense plan to cut taxes, build housing, fix the budget, and stop crime. And yet, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. He doubled our national debt, doubled the cost of housing, and tripled it in Montreal. To be frank, the end of the month is approaching, and Quebecers have a lot of anxiety about paying their rent. Will the Prime Minister finally backtrack on his inflationary policies, which might make Quebecers lose their houses and apartments? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, instead of increasing and stoking Canadians' anxiety with misinformation, he should share the real facts. And the fact is that our fiscal position is stronger than other G7 countries. We have the highest credit rating of all countries in the world. We are working responsibly to ensure that the government's assets are used to the benefit of Canadians. We have a comprehensive plan to create housing for all generations. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Really? He's accusing me of stoking anxiety among Quebecers. Without me, they never would have noticed that their rent had doubled. If I hadn't mentioned it, does he think Quebecers can't read numbers? He says the economy is not numbers, but rent is certainly numbers. The grocery bill, that's numbers. Will he finally look at the numbers and conclude that he is simply not worth the cost? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, for months and even years, we've been hearing the Conservatives say that our policy of investing in Canadians is causing the challenges Canadians are dealing with. On the contrary, our fiscal position is the strongest among G7 countries. We are investing and using that strong position precisely to help families that are struggling to get by. We're investing in housing, in healthcare, in dental care, in senior care, in child care. All those investments help Canadians. And the government is at the service of Canadians. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost after 9 years. He's doubled the debt, doubled housing costs. He's increased spending by nearly 80%. What did we get for the money? The worst per-person income growth in the entire G7. And the worst mortgage debt of all of those countries. When will he realize that the more he spends, the worse things get?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have been talking down the economy for a long time now without understanding that Canada has actually the strongest macroeconomic performance in the G7. And our perspective is to put that solid footing of the Government of Canada in service of Canadians by investing in housing, by investing in dental care, by investing in childcare, by investing in the supports that Canadians need in this difficult time. His solution is for governments to invest less in Canadians for ideological reasons, to be there less for people when they need it most.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, more proof that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. He tells Canadians they've never had it so good. He doubled the debt, doubled housing costs, forced 2 million people to a food bank. He brags that he spends $87 billion on housing programs, and what did it get us? Got us the worst housing inflation of any country in the G7, the second worst out of nearly 40 OECD countries. Why does he always spend the most to achieve the worst?
Right. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think Canadians will take no lessons from a former housing minister who was in a government that didn't believe in investing in housing. Obviously, over decades, Mr. Speaker, the federal government had underinvested in housing, and it has led to the challenges we're facing now. That is why we are putting, and have been putting, in service of Canadians since 2017, the solid fiscal position of the federal government to invest in Canadians, to invest in communities, to invest in housing, to help solve this challenge that people are facing around the world that we are solving despite.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right that we did not waste the billions of dollars that he's now put into his programs, but here are the results. The average rent for a one-bedroom when I was housing minister was $973, and we built 80,000 apartment units at that low rate when I was minister. Now the cost has more than doubled. Meanwhile, Stats Canada reports that incomes are down $17,000 per family. Why are Canadians making $17,000 less to pay double the price for a home?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Here's the question Canadians should be asking the Leader of the Opposition. Given that Canada has one of the strongest economic balance sheets in the G7 right now, country for country compared, should we be investing to support Canadians and create housing with that solid balance sheet? Or should, as the Conservative Leader is proposing, we cut programs, we reduce investment, and we do less for Canadians? We should be putting the strong fiscal position of this government in service of Canadians. That's what we're doing. That's what he opposes.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister appeared to condone the insulting comments of one of his members that have reverberated around the Francophone world. But it's all a bit of a distraction because the real issue is the funding of French language universities. So we don't look like barbarians again. Could the Prime Minister call for the resignation of the president of the APF and ask him to apologize to all our partners in the Francophonie? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I wouldn't like to interfere with the poetic arguments of the leader opposite, but the fact is that it's been known for a long time. It's the word that our member used has been used for a long time. He didn't invent it. Our member didn't invent it. He did apologize and withdraw his remarks. But the fact remains, Mr. Speaker, that we will stand up to protect Francophones all across the country and to defend French in Quebec, but also, and this is something the Bloc would never do and could never do, which is defend French outside Quebec all across the country.
Then I have
the Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, there's an expression in Quebec, I can't do anything that he doesn't do himself. So he's doubling down, he's laying it on thicker, he continues to condone comments that make no sense. He's trying to do something, he's trying to joke, but he's not very good at that. Could he simply take responsibility and shut up the clown beside him and call on the president of the APF to step down? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. The Bloc leader's responsibility is simply to pick fights with Ottawa. Our responsibility as a Liberal federal government is to defend official languages all across the country, to defend French in Quebec, but also defend French all across Canada. We will stand up and remain to defend language minorities all across the country. But it shouldn't surprise anyone that the most recent bugbear of the Bloc Québécois is to attack Franco-Ontarians. Everyone knows that they don't like Francophones outside Quebec.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
Canadians are struggling to put food on the table, and what are the Liberals doing? Well, they're giving $25 million to Costco and Loblaws. And what are the Conservatives doing? Well, the Conservatives, their leader is too busy whining and dining corporate lobbyists in private dinner clubs. You Democrats have a clear plan. We need to tackle corporate greed. We need to make sure we bring down the prices and stop giving millions of dollars to corporate grocery stores. When will the Liberals, when will the Prime Minister stop giving big grocery a free ride?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, not only are we continuing to move forward on our grocery code of conduct, but we're working on our project to make food more affordable through competition reforms. And now we're creating a national school food program, which is expected to provide meals for more than 400,000 kids a year and save the average family with 2 children as much as $800 per year on grocery costs. We're also ensuring the wealthiest pay their fair share. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, there are measures in the House right now that will crack down on predatory pricing, and the NDP has the opportunity to support us as it goes through this House.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Have the courage to take on corporate greed, which is driving up the cost of food, but we do.
As people struggle to fill their fridges, the Prime Minister is giving $25 million to Loblaws and Costco when they're making record profits. What's it going to take for this Prime Minister to understand these big grocery chains are raking in billions? They really don't need the handouts. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, not only are we continuing with the Code of Conduct for grocery stores, we're also making reforms to competition that should help bring prices down. We also are launching a national food school program that should help 400,000 school kids every year and allow families to save up to $800 per child. There are measures in our fall economic statement before the House now which should do away with abusive pricing, and the NDP can help us get those measures passed.
Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP leader was just asking about why the Prime Minister gave tens of millions of dollars in corporate handouts to powerful grocery chains. The answer, of course, is that he voted to let the Prime Minister do that. Not a single penny of that money could have gone without the vote of the NDP coalition partner. But we learned something else, that this might have been due to the influence of the NDP leader's spokesman and brother, whose company is a lobbyist for Metro. Would the Prime Minister support an investigation into whether or not the NDP leader's spokesman and brother has been unduly influencing the leader of the NDP?
The Right Honourable Prime... The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we can see very clearly that all the stories out about the lobbyists' connections with the Leader of the Opposition are actually hurting the Leader of the Opposition, which is why he's asking those questions of the NDP. But he has an opportunity right now, Mr. Speaker, to make it clear that he stands with Canadians and stands to ask the wealthiest to pay a little more by announcing now that he will support our measure on increasing the capital gains imposition on Canadians, asking the wealthiest to pay a little bit more. He has dodged that question since the budget came out. Does he support the increase on the capital gains inclusion rate?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I do support the Prime Minister paying more tax on the trust fund where he sheltered all of his money. Absolutely. He doesn't, unfortunately, support his own policies. That's why he won't put them into a budget bill. But one tax he is increasing is the carbon tax on food. He's doing it with the help of the NDP. We already have the second highest carbon tax in the entire developed world. And yet, if the NDP Liberal government is re-elected, they plan to quadruple that tax to 61 cents a litre on the farmers and truckers who bring us our food. How will Canadians afford to eat, heat, and house themselves?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, once again, Canadians saw that he avoided pronouncing on whether or not he supports our increase to the capital gains inclusions rate. But in regards to his deflection onto carbon pricing works. We're on track to meet our emissions for the first time in any government in Canadian history. And Canadians get more money back in their pockets thanks to the Canada Carbon Rebate. And families are already using that rebate to help pay their bills and plan their monthly budgets. Meanwhile, the Conservative leader continues to oppose every measure we put forward for both affordability and fighting climate change.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister, just like his carbon tax, is not worth the cost. The tax is already up to 17 cents a litre, higher than he promised it would go. And he plans to quadruple it further to 61 cents a litre. This after it is a proven environmental failure. Canada ranks 62nd out of 67 countries when it comes to fighting climate change. And this is precisely because what he has is a tax plan and not an environmental plan. Will he stop? Why won't he adopt our common sense plan for technology and not taxes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the Leader of the Opposition wants to present an actual plan to fight climate change, we'd love to see it. But he has refused to take any measure to fight climate change, period. He even doesn't recognize that pollution has a cost, which will only keep rising if we don't fight climate change, with extreme weather events and health impacts increasingly impacting on Canadians. Indeed, the Conservative leader thinks it should be free to pollute, and that we shouldn't be giving more money to Canadians through the Canada Carbon Rebate. We will continue to have an effective plan to fight climate change that is reducing emissions and putting more money back in Canadians' pockets with the CCR.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, since the Prime Minister introduced his carbon tax on the farmers who grow the food and the truckers who ship the food, it has raised the price on all who buy the food, with a record-smashing 2 million visits to food banks every single year. 50% of Canadians buying food past best before dates. 20% of them have gotten sick as a result of it. The Prime Minister promised that he was going to help the middle class and those working hard to join it. Now, the so-called middle class can't afford food and homes. Is that what he meant by help?
Yeah. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, 8 out of 10 Canadians, middle-income and lower-income Canadians primarily, do better with the Canada Carbon Rebate that lands in their bank accounts 4 times a year because of the price of pollution. But if the leader opposite actually cared about affordability and supporting vulnerable Canadians, he'd be standing up to support our measure on dental care, which has now delivered dental care to 30,000 vulnerable seniors across this country already in just a few weeks. He would be supporting our initiatives to help families. He'd be supporting our initiatives to help with childcare.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Oh, we have to do this all over again with him. The Parliamentary Budget Officer produced a report. I'm going to read the title so that he can Google it right now, Mr. Speaker. It is called The Parliamentary Budget Officer's Report on the Distribution of Costs and Benefits under the Carbon Pricing Program. He can look at page 3, where every single province that has the tax sees middle-class Canadians and 60% of families paying more in tax than they get back in benefits. Why won't he get to know the facts and axe the tax?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
As opposed to the Leader of the Opposition's campaign to simply axe the facts, we are going to continue to stand with the science, the evidence, the research, the economists who have all pointed out, including the Parliamentary Budget Officer, that the Canada Carbon Rebate puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 families in the jurisdictions across the country in which it is, and is effective in bringing down our emissions while creating economic growth as we invest in cleaner technology and good jobs and careers for the future. We have a plan for the economy and the environment. He does not.
Can I ask members, please? I know sometimes that members don't like hearing the question or the answer, but I'm asking all members, please, the only one who is standing up to, recognized by the Speaker, has the right to stand up and to ask a question. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, with his comedy routine, I was going to say that he shouldn't quit his day job, but actually, he should quit his day job. But he shouldn't go into number crunching, whatever his next job is, because he doesn't believe the economy is about numbers. And I don't blame him, because if I had his economic record, I wouldn't want to talk about numbers either. But it might help him to go to the library and quietly study just a little bit. Will he commit to reading page 3 of the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report, which demonstrates Canadians pay more than they get back in the tax?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer and far many more experts and economists have clearly demonstrated that the money that returns to Canadians through the Canada Carbon Rebate 4 times a year is greater than 8 out of 10 Canadians pay every year with the price on pollution. Those are the simple facts, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to invest in Canadians. We will continue to support with affordability. We will continue to put the best balance sheet in the G7 in the service of Canadians through investments and support, unlike the cuts he's proposing.
Hear, hear. Then I have
the Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, researchers using data from StatsCan, according to the Prime Minister, are people trying to pick a fight. But people who insult Quebec and cause the entire Francophonie to ask questions, is he not picking a fight himself and just defending his little buddy? I'd just like to remind all members to be very cautious with their use of terms in asking questions or answering. Let's make sure everything's parliamentary. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the member apologized and withdrew his use of the term cabron. We will continue to defend French and the Francophonie all across the world and Canada, which unfortunately the Bloc can't do because they attack Franco-Ontarians and they attack language minority communities all across the country. We will always stand up to defend French in Quebec to the tune of billions in investments, and we will be there for minority language communities all across the country, as we always have done. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, the term I used and which you mentioned was far less serious than the term he used opposite, which everyone's turning a blind eye to. The Prime Minister always tries to pit Francophones in Quebec against those outside Quebec, but I would remind him that during the last election campaign, I raised the issue of Francophones outside Quebec, and he said this isn't the right place to be talking about that. Is that picking a fight? Is that not picking a fight? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I would be delighted to be able to work with the members of the Bloc in defending French language communities all across Canada. But as you know, French may be doing better. If it's doing better in the rest of the country, that would do damage to their dream of independence. So that's why they really don't give a hoot about Francophone communities outside Quebec. They think Quebec is the only place where French needs protection. But we are working to protect French in Quebec, but we are doing the same all across the country. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. After 9 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost of housing. He has doubled the cost of housing. And now the crisis is such that more people than ever in Quebec are struggling. not-for-profit organizations are saying that some people are even contemplating suicide because they can't afford their rent next month. Will the Prime Minister finally stop his radical plan of building more bureaucracy instead of more housing? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we invested $900 million in Quebec alone with the Housing Accelerator Fund, and it's so well received by Quebecers that the government of Quebec has decided to match that with $900 million of their own because they know that that will deliver housing all across Quebec. We stand for working together with the provinces and municipalities to invest more in housing, while meantime, the Conservative leader is advocating ideological policies and austerity. What they're saying is false, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. And now he's spending more for fewer houses. It's true that he's spending hundreds of millions, billions, tens of billions. Every year it's a new number, more money for this program or that program. But people don't live by those numbers. They don't live in those numbers. They live in apartments and houses that cost twice as much as they did when he first took office. So does he now get it? After 9 years of creating the worst real estate crisis in the G7, does he not realize that the more he spends, the more expensive things get? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, people know full well that our investments in housing take years for the effects to be felt. And while he was housing minister under the previous government, they spent virtually nothing on housing for 10 years. They made no investments in housing. And now we're supposed to be surprised that in 2015, 2016, 2017, we started to see a housing crisis. It's because they underinvested for too long in housing. We are there to invest in communities and help Canadians out. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, I celebrated the fact, not admitted the fact, I celebrated the fact that our programs were much less costly and accomplished much more. The average rent was $973 a month, and now it's almost $2,000 a month. It used to take 38% on average for monthly bills, and now it's up to almost 64% of a person's income goes to paying the bills. Will he not admit that it's not just because the programs are expensive doesn't mean they're good? The Honourable Prime Minister. Well, we can see the fundamental choice Canadians will face in the next election. Should the government use Canada's strong fiscal position, the strongest among our allies, should that be put to the service of Canadians to invest in our communities and in housing, or should we cut programs, cut back to make our fiscal position even stronger, even though it's already the strongest in the G7? He's advocating ideological cuts and austerity instead of helping Canadians with what they need. Let's let Canadians make the choice. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, ever since he started his big spending programs, interest rates have increased. When you double the national debt, that drives interest rates up. Imagine. And everybody can see that that's the result. And that's why Canada has the highest mortgage debt and the highest housing costs in the G7. Will he not follow my common sense plan, dollar for dollar spending and reduction to reduce inflation rates? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, because of our sound fiscal management, inflation is coming down into the target range set by the Bank of Canada, and interest rates will also start coming down in the months to come. We're almost sure of that. And the Leader of the Opposition is mixing two things up. our very strong fiscal position and the situation of Canadian families who need more help. I am proposing that we use our strong position to help Canadians, but according to him, the government should cut back on services to Canadians, and he is wrong.
L'honorable chef de l'opposition. Oh, excusez-moi.
Yeah, one more.
Sorry. You'll forgive me. You'll forgive me. Sometimes the speaker listens very carefully to the debate and loses his place because he's listening to the substantive arguments which are being put forward by both sides. The honourable member from Nunavut.
Last month, the United Nations Special Rapporteur visited Canada. He confirmed what Indigenous peoples already know, that the right to clean drinking water is not being upheld. The Prime Minister has millions for the Northwest Company, Loblaws, and Costco, but asked Indigenous people to wait for clean drinking water. Will the Prime Minister stop fighting these solvable issues and ensure all First Nations have access to clean water?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to end boil water advisories across this country. When we took office in 2015, there were 109 long-term boil water advisories. We have now lifted about 135, 140, perhaps even a few more, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to lift long-term boil water advisories in ways that are building infrastructure, supporting communities, and solving this generations-long problem. We are here to continue to work with Indigenous communities on solving these problems in true partnership in building for that long-term future every Canadian and Indigenous people deserve.
The honourable member from Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Mr. Speaker, as the cost of living continues to soar, more people in Nanaimo Ladysmith are barely scraping by. Rent is up, groceries are up, and the number of households living below the poverty line continues to rise. But instead of helping those who need it, the Liberals are handing out $60 billion to the ultra-wealthy. And the Conservatives, well, they will always choose the side of lobbyists and rich CEOs. When will the Prime Minister stop propping up rich CEOs at the expense of those in Nanaimo Ladysmith and across Canada?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our latest budget is actually focused on equality for every generation, and a big cornerstone of that is asking the wealthiest Canadians to pay a little more so we can invest even more in housing, invest even more in pharmacare, invest even more in childcare, invest even more in ensuring there's programs like a school food program that's going to help 400,000 more kids across this country. We know there continues to be more to do, and we are stepping up because not only do we know that helping with affordability for Canadians matters, but confident countries invest in themselves, their people, and their future, and that's exactly what we're doing.
The honourable member from Kitchener South, Hespeler.
Mr. Speaker, our government's groundbreaking pharmacare program will provide free contraceptives to millions of women across Canada. While access to free contraceptives is fundamental for every woman to plan for their future on their time, the Conservative leader has chosen to deny women this basic freedom. Can the Prime Minister tell this House why a pharmacare program that guarantees free contraceptives is so important?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for Kitchener South Hespeler for her question. The Conservative leader opposes pharmacare and our plan to provide free contraceptions on prescription to Canadians, and we all know why. That leader and his caucus's ideological objection to reproductive freedoms is putting all Canadians at risk. Yesterday, the member for Peace River Westlock sponsored an anti-choice petition, and the member for Yorkton Melville has introduced several private members' bills that would serve as a sneaky backdoor to limit women's bodily autonomy. One would think that someone who claims to stand for freedom would be there for women as well, but he's not.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After 9 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Drugs, crime, and disorder are rampant, and they offer care to children And some people have to think about moving because a man died of an overdose in front of an early childhood care center. Will the Prime Minister listen to the Mayor of Montreal, who wants to legalize hard drugs, as he did in British Columbia? Is that what he's going to do? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's shameful to see the Leader of the Opposition instrumentalize tragedy to fearmonger and to raise funds for his party. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that they're wrong about the facts. There is no one in this country, beside the Leader of the Opposition, who is talking about legalizing hard drugs. Our approach is based on science, compassion, and a public health approach. That is what people need. They need housing and services and assistance, and that's what we're delivering. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
His government that's talking about legalizing drugs. They did it already. They legalized hard drugs in British Columbia, and the NDP in that province pulled back just before their election. Now, the Prime Minister has in his possession an application from the City of Toronto to repeat the same nightmare in that city. The minister responsible says that application is, quote, dormant, not dead. Dormant. Dormant means asleep. Isn't that really the Prime Minister's plan, to wake it up after the election so that he can impose the same thing on Toronto he did in BC?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, it's shameful to see the Leader of the Opposition misleading this House, misleading Canadians for his own fundraising political gain. There is nobody in this country talking about legalizing hard drugs, with the possible exception of members of the Conservative Party themselves. Mr. Speaker, our approach is focused on a public health approach grounded in science, compassion, and community safety. We're talking about the wraparound services like housing, mental health treatment, harm reduction that is helping people around the country, and we will continue to work with provinces and jurisdictions in their approach.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister is playing word games again. He pretends that there's a difference between legalization and decriminalization. Basically the same thing, but we'll use his word. He brought in decriminalization in British Columbia, which led to a 380% increase in overdose deaths, 2,500 deaths last year, the worst death count in any province's history. So will he, A, admit that his decriminalization in BC was a deadly disaster, or B, admit that he plans to do it again right across the country, everywhere after the next election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, earlier the Leader of the Opposition was suggesting I did my homework. You'd think that on an issue that the Leader of the Opposition is making so much fundraising money off of, he would have actually done his work and realized there is a difference between legalization and decriminalization, and that's one that really matters. We, yes, responded to a request for a pilot project by British Columbia to continue to try and approach new approaches in solving this toxic drug overdose epidemic, and we will continue to work with British Columbia as we have, as they choose to make adjustments to their pilot project, because we know saving lives and keeping communities safe is the most important thing.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I just asked now 4 times whether he plans to replicate in Montreal, in Toronto, or anywhere else the radical experiment that he's had to backpedal on in British Columbia. He won't answer the question. He has a request from the Montreal Mayor, the Toronto City Hall, and we don't know what other municipalities. So either A, he believes the experiment was a disaster, or B, he plans to repeat it. Which is it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have answered this question many times by saying that the only way we move forward on any proposals across this country around decriminalization or other methods to support to fight the toxic drug overdose is when provinces step up and actually ask for it. Failing that, we will not be moving forward on any modifications. However, there are provinces that are choosing to reduce their harm reduction measures, and we will continue to increase harm reduction and public health responses to overdoses and safe supply issues right across the country.
The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, now let's talk about extremism. Last week, there is a party leader in this House who was expelled for the use of the word extremist, and he did not apologize. Today, the Prime Minister is commending his friend for having used exactly the same word to witnesses, guests at a committee. Is this a double standard, or is he going to also expel his crony from the Francophonie Parliamentary Assembly? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, I expected the member to apologize and withdraw his remarks, and that's exactly what he did. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to defend the French fact across Canada and in the world with our participation in the Francophonie, with our conviction that not only do we have to protect both our official languages across the country, but we also need to be there to invest in and protect French in Quebec. And we're the first government to have done so, and we're going to continue to be there to protect French throughout the country. The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. I just heard him say that both official languages have to be protected. Where does English need to be protected? Next summer in Montreal, there's going to be the equivalent of a Francophonie Parliamentary Assembly in Montreal that's going to be chaired by his buddy. But I think I've understood, Mr. Speaker, for the Liberals, they're trying to tell everyone that French is fine in Quebec and they don't have to do anything. That's just to appease English Canadians, isn't it? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, we are the first government, the first federal government, to recognize that we have a specific responsibility to protect and help in the protection of French in Quebec. No other government before ours has done this, and that's because we recognize that we have to do more to protect French. But unlike the Bloc, we are not only focusing on French in Quebec. We're going to continue to protect it across the country. In Acadia, we're going to do it in Ontario, in Manitoba, in the north, across the country.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Not only is the Prime Minister refusing to rule out future decriminalization across the country that has just failed in BC, he's now just announced he plans to spend even more tax dollars on narcotic opioids. According to the Vancouver Chief of Police, 50% of the recovered hydromorphone was originated with government programs handing it out as so-called safe supply. This program has led to a 166% increase in drug deaths across the country since it was brought in. Why won't he accept my common sense plan to stop giving out deadly drugs and start giving out treatment?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition proposes to return to the failed Harper-era approaches on opioids that their own former advisor, Benjamin Perrin, called obsolete and immoral. Mr. Speaker, over the past number of years, we've invested in a compassionate, science-based, evidence-grounded approach that includes harm reduction, that includes approaching with a public health lens on this. It also includes investing in housing, in mental health supports, in frontline workers, in addiction treatment and recovery programs. These are the things that move us forward, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, when we were in government, there were 60% fewer overdose deaths. This problem accelerated after he brought in these radical programs that are not done anywhere else to give corrupt pharmaceutical companies money to hand out more drugs. David McAvoy, an addiction outreach worker right here in Ottawa, says that he witnesses the so-called safe supply clients diverting their taxpayer-funded drugs to the black market, and that they are given, quote, an insane quantity of drugs. Will the Prime Minister stop giving out insane quantities of heroin-grade opioids and start bringing treatment so we can bring our loved ones home drug-free?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know that any Canadian would think that adding more ideology to our approach to public health, dealing with the opioids epidemic, is a solution, and yet that's the only thing that the Conservative Party seems to offer. We will continue to be grounded in a compassionate, science-based approach that works with local partners, that attempts to provide the kinds of wraparound services, whether it's housing, whether it's healthcare, whether it's addiction treatment and recovery, whether it's culturally appropriate services for those who need it. We will continue to be there to help heal people, not imprison them.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
They are there to help kill people right now. That's exactly what they are doing. And, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to, colleagues, I'll be coming, colleagues. We are going to, the Speaker will come back to this issue. I'll allow the Honourable Member to continue his question. It's 24 seconds on the clock.
Not only is his policy killing people, but this Prime Minister is by far the most radical ideologue who's ever occupied that job. Yes. But always with these radical policies comes profiteering. The companies that are making the money off of the opioids that are funded by Canadian taxpayers, and it is indeed sick, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister agree to release all of the contracts for those pharmaceutical companies?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are facing right across the country a toxic drug and opioid epidemic that is taking lives left, right, and center, that is hurting communities, that is hurting family members who are losing loved ones at an alarming rate, that is something we need to respond to. And we have continued to work, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, in thoughtful ways to try and do everything possible to both keep communities safe and to keep families from suffering these further losses and support people struggling with addiction. We will continue to be grounded in evidence and support.
Right on. The Honourable Member from Vaughan Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, more Canadians are now renting than ever before. These renters, many of whom are seniors or on fixed incomes, face rising rents and rent eviction threats. Can the Prime Minister tell this House what our government is doing to help them stay?
Colleagues, I know it is Wednesday. I know that members have come out of caucuses and they're ready to go, but it's really important that we take the opportunity to listen to the questions. It will be from the top because the Speaker can't help it. So. The Honourable Member from Vaughan Woodbridge from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, if I can make a point of order.
No, the Honourable Member is an experienced member. He knows that there are no points of order during question period. The Honourable Member can raise a point of order after question period. The Honourable Member from Vaughan Woodbridge from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, more Canadians are now renting than ever before. These renters, many of whom are seniors or on fixed incomes, face rising rents and rent eviction threats. Can the Prime Minister tell this House what our government is doing to help them stay in their homes and enjoy affordable and stable accommodation?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I agree with the member for Vaughan Woodbridge that more needs to be done for renters. That's why we're unlocking well over 600,000 new rental homes across the country for the middle class, investing $1.5 billion to keep affordable apartments affordable, and introducing a new Renters' Bill of Rights to protect renters. The Leader of the Opposition doesn't seem to worry about renters. He was housing minister in a government that pulled out of housing, and now he wants to raise the taxes on apartment construction and continues to delay debate on his own housing proposal because he knows it doesn't measure up. We will not rest until we level the playing field for renters.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After 9 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the corporate crime and corruption. According to the Criminal Intelligence Service, there is $113 billion a year of money laundering. That's the equivalent of twice the entire GDP of Nova Scotia. And that money laundering, all of it here in Canada, drives up housing costs, it pays for drugs and stolen cars. Why is it that the Americans had to be the ones to catch TD and charge them with money laundering linked to fentanyl? Why didn't our federal government crack down on that?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is obviously a very concerning situation. We're making sure that all the appropriate authorities are properly engaged. We know that we need to continue to invest in our national policing. We need to continue to invest in our intelligence services, and that's exactly what this government has been doing and will continue to do. Unlike the previous Conservative government that cut policing, that cut intelligence services, we will continue to be investing in keeping Canadians safe, in countering the rise of organized crime, and in making sure that people are confident about the future we're growing into.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal member for Glengarry Prescott Russell used crass language to Quebec witnesses who had come to defend the French language. This is not just a Liberal member. He is also the chair of the Parliamentary Association of the Francophonie, in fact, a diplomat representing Canada. He has only one single choice, and that is to resign. Will the Prime Minister call for the resignation of this member to show respect for la Francophonie? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we can see the reaction of the Francophone members in the Conservative Party when the leader finally is showing concern about French in Canada. We are here to defend la Francophonie. We are here to defend the French fact across Canada. And the member apologized. He withdrew his remarks. But we're also seeing is that their own heritage critic was unable to defend Radio-Canada when a direct question was put. We know that the Conservatives want to cut CBC funding, and they should say so clearly. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, he's the one who's cutting funding to Radio-Canada CBC, and we are the ones who are going to protect Radio-Canada at CBC. And we're going to conserve jobs at CBC. Mr. Speaker, why does this Prime Minister continue to defend gigantic bonuses for CBC bureaucrats? Because Canadians want nothing to do with this. Why don't they protect Radio-Canada services instead of bonuses? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, there is no one who speaks French in this country who thinks that the Conservatives are going to defend Radio-Canada. That's a joke. They know full well that the ideological opposition of the Conservative Party to public broadcasters is deeply rooted, and they know full well that the cuts to CBC Radio-Canada are going to come if a Conservative government is elected, and that's why they know that they have to fight the Conservative ideology. But I urge the Conservative leader to say in English what he has just said in French.
The honourable member from Sudbury.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, the right to women to decide on their own bodies is a fundamental right. Our government has always defended this right, but the Conservative Party can't say the same. Can the Prime Minister explain to this House why women, and only women, should decide on what happens with their body and on their futures? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Sudbury for her question. The leader of the opposition is playing political games with the Canadians' rights and freedoms, and it is clear that he's not going to protect women's rights to abortion. He boasted about using the notwithstanding clause to trample on the rights of Canadians, and women's right to choose should not be debated in this House in 2024, but because of him, it has come up. I hope that tomorrow all of the Conservative caucus will be here in the House for Canadians instead of going out to oppose abortion. Canadian women deserve better.